Time. So, what are the first steps to create an OSGi module? Well, you can use the studio, as I said, or you could use the Maven Archetype. This will actually ask you to select a type of project you want to build. You can just choose, for example, the module one, or if you want to build templates, you'll choose a template one. And it'll ask you for some project metadata, like the group ID or the artifact name. And you can confirm it and then simply change into the project directory and use clean install to build your project. Now, let's say that we are going to build a very simple first module, and we're going to add a content definition file. So here we have a very simple one that just has a single property. It's a simple node type with a property called hello name. And we're going to add a view for this. So what happens in OSGi when I do that? Let's look at what happens in the dependencies. This is what happens. Now, you're lucky. You're not going to have to deal with this. I wasn't so lucky when I was developing the OSGi system. Because this is what we're trying to do for you, is that we're trying to make this a lot easier. So we're going to use our new Maven goal called OSGi inspect. What it does is that it cleans up that really difficult to read header. And basically, what you saw before now looks like this. A lot easier to read. And this just shows you, because when you use taglibs, a lot of dependencies on packages of taglibs come in. So that's why there's so many dependencies. But you don't have to deal with this. It's just going to be done transparently. You could actually do this on any jar. So this is really neat, because when you use OSGi, you want to often quickly see what's inside a jar. And on, for example, Windows, it's much easier because the tooling is really good. You can go see inside a zip or something. But for example, on Mac, it's much more tricky. Now, you can use our Maven plugin. It's a longer version here of the command line, but on any OSGi jar or even on a regular jar. And it will print out very easy to read headers. What we also do for you is we actually go see what content types you've defined in your module. And we actually define those in the headers. So it's possible. What the plugins will do is say, this module exposes these content types or uses these content types. And if you try to deploy a module that needs a content type that's not there, it will refuse. It will say, no, you can't do that. Now, package dependencies, I said it's very, very important. So you can only use a Java package if it's exported by an OSGi bundle and if it's imported by your own bundle. You need to do both. So you need to define these imports and these exports inside the manifest.mf file. The Maven plugin by Apache Felix will generate the bundle for you. It's based on a tool called the BND tool that parses the compiled Java classes to extract the dependencies. But it's mostly just a very simple wrapper around this tool. And so it prepares input for it and it post-processes the output. What this plugin cannot do is scan non-Java sources, such as JSPs, taglibs, or any other. I'm sorry, that went fast. That was any other non-Java file. What we provide is we provide a new goal that's called the Java dependencies goal that complements what the Felix plugin does. It can scan for a lot of resources, such as JSPs, taglibs, Groovy files, rules files, Java content definitions, import files, and more. And it will just generate very precise dependencies, including version numbers. So if we look at it on a graph, basically this goal will analyze the source code. It will generate an output that will be given to the Maven plugin. And this plugin will use instructions inside the pom.xml file to generate the headers for OSGi and finally generate the jar. So, how do we integrate non-OSGi libraries inside a module or an OSGi bundle? There are basically three possibilities. The first one is to convert this external library into an OSGi bundle. There are multiple ways to do that. Either you recompile it from source, or you use some systems that can actually dynamically do the transformation. You could embed it into your own module. So this is usually what most people will do, is just say, okay, I'll just put it inside my bundle. So inside my bundle I have jar files. Inside my jar I have other jar files. It's not the best way in terms of proper OSGi packaging, but it's, let's say, a good first step. And the only thing is you have to be very careful with dependencies of dependencies because it could pull the world. You could suddenly find yourself with a lot of jars. And the last one, I mention it because it exists, but I really don't recommend it, is you could put it in the web and flib. But frankly, that kind of beats the purpose of OSGi. So you really should be careful about doing this as a last resort. Now, one of the first things you'll have trouble with is, okay, I'm building an OSGi project. I want to use OSGi bundles. Where do I find them? This is actually not that trivial when you don't know where to look. Now, the good thing is that most Apache projects now are OSGi bundles. So if you're using Apache libraries, you probably don't have anything to do. If you don't have a bundle, they have a project called Service Mix that contains a big collection of OSGi bundles already prepared for you. And finally, the Spring source site also has a repository, but the problem is that it's no longer maintained. So you have to be careful. If you find something in there and it's also available in Service Mix, you should take the Service Mix ones because they're better quality and they're more recent. So, as I said, if you find it, you have to double check it because it might have been poorly done. It might have other dependencies. But if you don't find one, a bundle, I mean, probably the easiest way to do it is just embedding the jar inside your project, inside your bundle. But if you do go through the effort of doing the transformation, everybody, and not just us at Jahia, will thank you for it because a lot of people want OSGi bundles because there are other platforms that use OSGi. Okay. I'm just going to try to save some time on this. So where can dependencies come from? So as I said, in resources, you could also have use library that itself has dependencies. And understanding how this works actually means that you need to understand how the scanning works. Well, fortunately, not exactly. Because again, we're providing a goal that will help you with this. This is an example of an error you might see. Basically, what I did here is that I deployed a bundle that has a dependency to another package that's not on my system. So I see here there's an error, it says missing requirement, and it's giving me a package. So now I'm like, fine, I have a package. What on earth do I do with that? Well, before this plugin, at least as far as I can see, you're in trouble because you don't really know what to do. But now we have the Jahia find packages uses goal. And you just give it the name of the package you're looking for, and we'll scan your project, all the source code, all the dependencies, all the transitive dependencies, and it will tell you this is where this is coming from. So you're getting a lot of time with this. So what you end up doing is that we found that there's a dependency coming from the Jackson project, but actually I don't need the Jackson project in my module, so I'm just going to exclude it. And there, my problem's gone. My dependency is gone. Packages uses could sometimes be in optional dependencies. So in that case, you could just mark the dependency as optional in OSGi. Say, okay, this is not something I really need. It's just that if it's there, I'll use it. If it's not in an optional dependency, but it's not used at runtime, you could just exclude it. So there's a little bit of an iterative process here where you basically have to if you run into these problems, just say, okay, I need to look at that. This is where OSGi is more constraining than what you've done previously. But trust me, despite the initial sort of learning process, you'll really benefit from this because this is a very important requirement in terms of hot deployment. This is why hot deployment is possible. It's because of these restrictions. Now let's quickly look at another example. This one was a little bit more difficult to resolve. This is a really concrete example I actually had. So here, suddenly it's telling me I need a com.ibm.jvm class of all things. I'm working on the Sun JVM. Why is it telling me I need that? Well, let's go look for it. Again, I'm going to use my plugin. And here it tells me it's used in a Derby class. I'm like, why does Derby tell me I need an IBM JVM class? So I want to figure that out. So I'm going to search on Maven.org for the Arg Apache Derby package, and I found nothing. I'm going to Google this class. And there I found the code. And there I found where it came from. So it's a class 4 name for that class. And looking at the code, I realized, well, this is optional. So I went through a lot of trouble to do this. I didn't necessarily do it. You could just probably mark things as optional and see if it works. But in this case, I went a little bit further than that. So it's probably okay to declare it optional. And that's exactly what I did. I just marked the package as optional. So I'm not trying to scare you here. I'm just trying to give you tips. This is really what I did in this project. Now, OSGi services. So bundles can expose or use services. Services are basically sub-object instances, like singletons. The trick is, as deployment can happen any time during the runtime of the application, they can come and go at any time. So that's kind of tricky to deal with. But OSGi provides different ways of registering services. So I'm just going to give you a quick example here of a service implementation. So here, I just have my interface. I have the implementation of the interface. And here, I just register my service. So here I did it by hand using the API, the OSGi API. If I want to use my service, I just access the OSGi service registry and tell it to give me a service that implements the interface. That's how it works. You always access through the interface. But you have to be careful, because here I got a service reference, but maybe the next second it's gone. Maybe it's suddenly, I got my thing and it's undeployed and boom, my service is gone. So how do I handle that? So normally you would have to do if null checks all the time, and you don't want to do that. So fortunately, one of the frameworks in OSGi that helps you with this is actually something that was contributed by Spring to the OSGi specification. And so basically the dependency injection component was contributed to the OSGi standard and called Blueprint. So what it means is that your XML files, your Spring XML files, are actually compatible with this. So you could use either syntax, the new Blueprint XML syntax or the Spring XML syntax. So this is a demo I would have really loved to do, but you have to trust me on it. But basically what I'm going to illustrate this with is with a simple example called the hello command. So I just here, I cheated, I didn't even declare an interface. I'm directly going to use this as the interface and the implementation. And here I just take a string and output a string with hello in front of it. Now, this is how I declare this service inside of OSGi Blueprint. So I just tell it, okay, I have a bean called shell commands. I'm going to expose it as a service with the same interface. And then these two properties here are instructions for the shell, the command line shell you saw earlier, as to what the name of that command is going to be. And if I show you the Spring version, which is also, which you can also use in your project, it's almost the exact same thing. The only difference is the OSGi prefix here. And that's because it's the same code base that was contributed to OSGi. So which should you use? The OSGi blueprint or the Spring format? You should use in Jahia the Spring one. Mostly because that's what you've been using, but also because it's tightly integrated with our lifecycle. You can use Blueprint, of course, the Blueprint format for any non-Jahia projects you have that are either used in Jahia but that are not specific to Jahia. So for example, if you're using a bundle that's written using Blueprint that's been developed that way and you're just using it as is, it will work. Now, what I would have loved to show you, but we don't have time, is that once I deploy this, I go into my telnet that you've seen before. I type hello space JahiaOne, and it calls that method you just saw, and that's it. I've built an OSGi service that augmented the functionality of the shell, and I could have done the same thing with the web console or with the Jahia administration UI. Now, we're going to get close to the end. I just want to give you a few tips. There are different service declaration systems. We saw Blueprint, but there are others. Do not mix them in the same module. You could do registration by hand using activators, or you could use the Blueprint, or there's another one called declarative services. Trust me, do not do this because you'll lose a lot of time at trying to understand why things are not properly starting up. So don't do it. Trust me, I've gone through it. Another thing is that try to split your OSGi bundles into smaller bundles. Don't try to make a big bundle that does everything. It's not a good practice. It will make things a lot more difficult to debug and understand. And usually, once you start splitting them up, you'll find a better way to reuse them between projects. Of course, use the Maven plugin to understand where packages are coming from. I mean, I've developed this plugin for that because I was myself trying to understand where these things are coming from. Okay, that's almost it. So basically, what's possible now is that building Jahia modules that include services make it really possible to do things that were not possible before. So you can start exposing even REST services. You'll see in one of the presentations by my colleague Chris, where basically we're using a module to expose REST services. It's possible to leverage existing services. Let's say you find a bundle that has a service inside of it and you want to use it. That's really neat. It's also now possible to have a highly flexible and dynamic system inside of Jahia where you're deploying and redeploying and hot deploying or whatever you want. Finally, and this is more important since I didn't go through them, a few resources on the web. So we have a Hello World module that's really like the minimalistic module you can make that's been converted to OSGi, but we also have at the same location you'll find a branch for Jahia 6.6. The module I've illustrated here with the Hello World, if you want to have a look at it, it's also available on the web. Of course, you know, the OSGi specification, if you really you're interested in understanding why things were done in a certain way, they're not that difficult to read. I mean, in terms of specification, I've seen a lot worse. The Apache Phoenix project, which is the implementation we use. The Apache Carve project I mentioned quickly because it's where a lot of really, really neat things in the OSGi world are happening right now. As well as the Apache Arias project, which is sort of the sister project of that. They're basically two projects that are really sort of driving the innovation in the OSGi world. And just for a quick note, Apache Arias is actually a big contribution by IBM, which is also using that inside of WebSphere. Okay, I think I hope I went fast, so we can all